They sat across from me at my own kitchen table, in my own home eating food I had cooked, and told me that my money wasn't really mine. I pressed one button and made sure they never forgot what that sentence cost them. My name is Carolyn. I am 51 years old, and for most of those years I believed that if you loved people hard enough, consistently enough, quietly enough, they would eventually learn to love you back in the same currency. I was a slow learner. It took a kitchen table, a legal document, and a single button on my phone to finish my education. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with the money. It never really does. I grew up in a family that treated financial survival as a group sport. My parents immigrated from Barbados in the early 1970s with 2 suitcases and a combined $40, and they built a life in Philadelphia through the particular alchemy of relentless work and radical sacrifice. We were not poor in the way that breaks people. We were the kind of working poor that quietly builds character while also quietly building resentment, depending on who you ask. There were 3 of us children. I was the middle child, and there is a pattern in my life. I am aware between my older brother Winston and my younger sister Nadine. Winston was the one my father poured his ambitions into. Nadine was the one my mother softened for. I was the one who kept the household running while both of those investments were being made. I was cooking full dinners by age 11, managing the grocery budget by 13, sitting with my father at the kitchen table helping him understand his pay stubs at 15, because his English was good, but the bureaucratic language of American wages was a different dialect entirely. Nobody assigned me these responsibilities. They simply accumulated around me the way water finds its level, because I was capable, and because capable people in struggling families get quietly recruited into service without anyone calling it that. I want to be clear that I loved my parents with a fullness that I have never found words adequate to describe. My father died in 2019, and there is still not a day that passes without me reaching for the phone to tell him something. My mother is 83 and lives 30 minutes from me, which is a gift I do not take lightly. But love and fairness are not the same thing. And in my family, I learned very early that they would sometimes be required to coexist without the second one being present. I became a financial analyst at 24, which my family received as evidence of their collective success rather than mine. I climbed methodically and without drama through a regional bank, then a larger institution, then 17 years ago landed a position at an investment management firm in downtown Philadelphia, where I have risen to the level of senior portfolio strategist. It is demanding, meticulous work that requires a particular kind of mind, one that can hold complexity without panic, and resist the emotional impulse to make decisions that feel good, instead of decisions that are sound. I applied all of that discipline to my own finances. I lived below my means for 27 years. Not deprivation. I have a beautiful townhouse in Chestnut Hill. I travel twice a year. I eat well and dress well and invest in the things that genuinely matter to me. But I drove cars for 10 years before replacing them. I have never carried credit card debt. I maxed my retirement contributions for 2 decades before many of my peers understood why it mattered, and I saved. Deliberately, systematically, joylessly at times I saved the $250,000 in my personal savings account. Was not a windfall. It was not an inheritance. It was not luck. It was 27 years of choosing the future over the present, one decision at a time. In a country that makes saving deeply difficult and spending irresistibly easy, it was mine. The trouble began, as family trouble so often does, with a crisis that had nothing to do with me. Winston had overinvested in a restaurant group that collapsed spectacularly during the economic contractions of recent years. He lost a significant amount of money. His wife, Tamara, had co-signed on business loans that were now coming due. They were facing the kind of financial pressure that warps people, the kind that makes previously reasonable individuals do unreasonable things because panic has replaced judgment. I had compassion for this. I genuinely did. I know what financial fear feels like, even if my version of it lives in memory rather than present reality. I reached out to Winston when I heard the news. I offered to look at his situation, help him understand his options, connect him with a bankruptcy attorney I trusted if it came to that. I was using the tools I had, my expertise, my network, because that felt like the right kind of help. Winston did not want that kind of help. He wanted $150,000. He called me on a Tuesday evening and laid it out with a directness that I had to admit, through my shock, was at least honest. He needed the money to settle the most pressing debts and protect the family home. He genuinely believed, I could hear it, that I had an obligation to provide it. "You've always had more than you needed," he said. "This is what family does." I asked him to give me some time to think. "There's not that much time," he said. "The deadline on the primary note is 6 weeks out." I said I understood. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a very long time. Over the following 2 weeks, the family pressure system activated with an efficiency that, looking back, I can only describe as organized. My mother called 3 times. She was careful. She never said I had to give Winston the money, but she talked about family, loyalty, and about how hard things were and about how my father would have wanted us to take care of each other. That last one landed the hardest. She knew it would. She is a loving woman and a strategic one, and those 2 things have always lived comfortably together inside her. Nadine texted, then called, then showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday morning with coffee and a prepared speech about how I had always been the strong one, the stable one, the one who could handle things. And wasn't this one of those times? She also mentioned, with studied casualness, that she had already contributed $5,000 to Winston's situation from money she didn't really have. The implication was clear. The hierarchy of sacrifice had been established. I was expected to climb it. Winston's wife, Tamara, sent me a handwritten note, 4 pages. It described their life in careful, painful detail. Their children's faces when they thought they might lose the house. The sleepless nights, the shame. It was genuinely moving, and I don't doubt its sincerity. It was also leverage, and the fact that it was both things simultaneously is something I have made a certain peace with. The ask evolved over those 2 weeks. 150,000 became in a phone call with Winston where I had said nothing to justify the escalation. 250,000, all of it, the entirety of my savings. "You can rebuild," Winston said. "You make good money. You'll have it back in a few years. For us, this is everything." I asked him how he had arrived at the specific number of my total savings. There was a pause that told me more than anything that followed. "Mom mentioned what you had," he said finally. My mother had told him my savings balance. I sat with that for a very long time. The kitchen table meeting was Winston's idea. He suggested it as a family conversation to discuss the situation together, a framing that implied collaboration but was, as I understood perfectly well, a closing argument. He wanted Nadine there. He wanted my mother there. He wanted the full weight of the family in one room. I agreed to it because I had already made my decision, and because I wanted to be the kind of person who looks things in the face rather than away from them. They arrived on a Thursday evening. I cooked jerk chicken and rice because I was raised to feed people who come to my table, even people who come with intentions I don't respect. We ate together and talked about other things, my mother's doctor appointments, Nadine's son's school situation, the neighborhood, the weather, with the particular strained pleasantness of people who are saving the real conversation for later. When the plates were cleared, Winston placed a folder on my kitchen table. Inside was a simple 1-page document, a family loan agreement, already typed, already dated. It outlined a transfer of $250,000 from my account to Winston's, structured technically as a loan with nominal interest, repayment terms vague enough to be meaningless. Beneath the loan document was a second page, a gift letter. In case, Winston explained, the loan structure created tax complications. "Either way works," he said. "We just need the mechanism." I looked at the documents. I looked at my brother, who I had helped with homework at the age of 9. I looked at my sister, who had slept in my bed during thunderstorms until she was 12. I looked at my mother, who had carried our entire family across an ocean on her back. "I want to show you something," I said. I picked up my phone from the counter. 3 months earlier, when the pressure campaign had just begun, I had done what I always do with problems. I had studied it. I had spoken with an estate and asset protection attorney. I had restructured several aspects of my financial holdings, And I had done one very specific thing. I had moved the majority of my savings, methodically and legally and with complete transparency, to every institution involved, into a self-directed, irrevocable trust, with terms that made the funds inaccessible for personal liquidation, without triggering a specific, multi-step process requiring my signed declaration and a 30-day regulatory review window. In plain language, I had made it legally impossible for me to simply hand over the money, even if I wanted to. The button I pressed opened the trust documentation portal on my phone. I turned the screen around and placed it gently on the table in front of Winston. "This is where the money is," I said. "It's been there for 11 weeks. I can show you the trust agreement if you'd like to read the access restrictions." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever experienced in a quiet room. Winston stared at the screen. I watched his face move through several distinct expressions: confusion, comprehension, something that approached anger before he visibly controlled it. "You knew," he said. "You knew we were going to ask you and you—" I protected myself, I said. "Yes, that's not what family does." I looked at him for a moment before I answered. "Winston, you told me a number that matched my exact savings balance. That number came from our mother. And then 2 weeks later, you asked me for all of it. You tell me what that is and then tell me again what family does." Tamara reached over and put her hand on Winston's arm. I don't know if it was to comfort him or restrain him. My mother was very quiet. She had not looked up from the table. Nadine said softly, "Carolyn, I love you," I said to all of them, and I meant it in the complicated, wide-open way that I always have. "I love all of you." I would have helped Winston. I offered to help Winston, with my expertise, with my connections, with my time. I offered concrete, real assistance that might have actually solved the underlying problem rather than just quieted it temporarily. I paused. What was asked of me instead was to empty my life savings in a way that would have left me without a safety net, without options, and without any expectation of repayment that any reasonable person would call real. And when I took time to think about it, the response was not patience, it was escalation. Family meetings, coordinated calls, a loan document already printed. I picked my phone up from the table. "I pressed a button," I said. 3 months ago, I pressed a button and protected what I built. That is the whole story. Winston and Tamara left within 20 minutes. Nadine stayed for another hour, and we talked with a rawness we hadn't managed since we were young. About patterns, about expectations, about what had always been asked of me and what had never been acknowledged. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was an honest one, which was more valuable. My mother stayed until almost 10 o'clock. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink, and she looked at me across the table and she said, "Your father used to say that you were the one who would be all right, that you were the one he didn't worry about." "I know," I said. "I think," she said carefully, "that we use that as an excuse to take without asking." It was the most accurate thing she had ever said to me, and it cost her something to say it. I reached across the table and held her hand. "I'm not punishing Winston," I said. "The trust has a charitable allocation structure that allows emergency family distributions under specific circumstances with independent trustee approval. I already submitted an application on his behalf for a partial allocation, $60,000, to cover the most critical debt. The trustee will review it next month." My mother stared at me. "You did that already?" 3 weeks ago," I said, her eyes filled with tears. "Then why didn't you just tell him?" "Because he needed to understand," I said gently, "that my help is something I offer, not something that can be demanded." The trust distributed $62,000 to Winston's debt settlement 4 weeks later. It was enough to save the house and negotiate down the most dangerous remaining obligations. It was not everything he had asked for. It was what I determined was right. Through a process no one could pressure, on a timeline no one could accelerate. Winston called me when the funds cleared. He was quiet for a long moment and then he said, "I didn't deserve that." "No," I said, "you didn't, but I wasn't doing it for what you deserved. I was doing it for what I believe is right. That is the distinction that has guided my entire financial life, and I have come to understand my emotional one as well, not what is owed, not what is demanded. What I believe in the clearest and most honest part of myself is right. It has been 7 months since that kitchen table evening. Winston and Tamara are rebuilding, and slowly, genuinely, with the kind of reckoning that is actually useful, because it cannot be bypassed with a cash transfer. Nadine and I have the most honest relationship we have had in 30 years. My mother and I have dinner every Sunday, and I have $250,000 at minus the 62, sitting in a trust that I built with 27 years of careful choices, protected by one deliberate button press, earning quietly in the background of my life the way it always has. Here is what I know now, that I want you to hear clearly. The people who love you for what you provide will always find a language that makes your boundaries sound like selfishness. They will talk about family and loyalty and sacrifice and what your father would have wanted. They will make the folder. They will print the loan agreement. They will show up with coffee and prepared speeches. And the answer, the whole answer, is to have already pressed the button. Protect what you built before anyone asks you to hand it over. Not because your family doesn't deserve your love, but because love given under pressure is not love. It is surrender. And you are worth more than what you are willing to give away when you are afraid of losing people who should not be making you afraid in the first place. I pressed one button. I pressed it for myself, which was the most radical act of love I have ever committed.